Do you even know what you're doing? Brian Lewis's voice sliced through the shop like a blade. The clang of metal and hum of machines went silent. Every eye turned toward the man in the tailored suit, and the mechanic he was belittling. Derrick Coleman straightened slowly from under the hood, grease-stained hands steady, eyes calm. He'd heard voices like Brian's all his life, the kind that confuse money for intelligence and arrogance for authority. Laughter rippled from the back of the shop, awkward, forced, the kind that stings more than it sounds. Derrick didn't respond. He just wiped his hands and went back to work, quiet, composed, and underestimated. Because what Brian Lewis didn't know was this. The man he mocked for being uneducated had built something his money could never buy, and before the week was over, Brian would learn that the only thing more powerful than wealth is wisdom earned through humility. This is Hidden Black Echoes, where the stories of struggles are told, the rise and the voice of those the world tried to silence. If you believe respect should never depend on titles or income, tap like and subscribe. Because in the next few minutes, you'll see how a single act of humility turned arrogance into silence, and left a man with everything realizing he had nothing that truly mattered. Do you even know what you're doing? Brian Lewis's voice sliced through the morning noise of the shop, loud enough for everyone to hear. Derrick Coleman looked up from under the hood of the silver Mercedes. Sweat beaded on his temple, glinting in the light that filtered through the open bay doors. He'd heard that tone before. Sharp, condescending, heavy with the kind of confidence only money could buy. "Yes, sir," Derrick said evenly. "Just finishing the diagnostic?" Brian snorted. "Diagnostic? It's a flat tire, not a math equation. Maybe if you'd gone to college, you'd know that." The laughter that followed wasn't from Derrick, just the uncomfortable chuckles of two younger mechanics who didn't know what else to do. Derrick didn't flinch. He wiped his hands on a rag, calm as a Sunday breeze. He'd learned long ago that some people didn't speak to be understood. They spoke to be heard. The auto shop sat on the edge of downtown, half brick, half steel, the kind of place where the air smelled of oil and hard work. Customers came in every day with broken cars, and sometimes with broken manners. Derrick fixed both, though he charged extra for the latter. Brian Lewis stood out the moment he walked in that morning. Tailored suit, polished shoes, watch that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His car had been towed in, a brand new Mercedes S-Class with a digital dashboard that looked more like an airplane cockpit than a vehicle. When Derrick ran the first scan, he noticed more than a bad tire. The onboard computer had a dozen alerts: low pressure, GPS faults, and a malfunction in the car's voice assistant. It needed more than air. It needed patience. But patience wasn't something Brian seemed to own. "Look," Brian said, waving his hand dismissively, "I don't have time for some uneducated grease hand making guesses. I need someone who knows what he's doing." Derrick set the tablet down, slow and steady. "Sir, the system shows a sensor failure that can trigger your GPS and steering assist. It's not safe to drive until it's fixed." Brian rolled his eyes. "What do you know about safety? You probably took a weekend course and called yourself a mechanic." For a moment, the shop went still. Then Derrick smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made insults bounce off like rain on steel. "You're right," he said. "Didn't go to college for this. Learned it in my father's garage. Been fixing cars since I was 12. Brian crossed his arms. "Figures." That one word hung heavy in the air. Derrick turned back to the engine, choosing silence over anger. His hands moved with precision, each motion deliberate. He knew the machine better than most people knew themselves. He didn't need to prove anything. Still, as he ran the next test, the car's digital display flickered. A voice prompt popped up from the dash. "Welcome back, Brian. Navigation is resuming from last saved route." The screen lit up, revealing the destination. Coleman Community Center. Vocational Training Program. Derrick froze. That was his center, the small non-profit he'd built on weekends, teaching young people how to work with their hands, giving kids like him a chance at skilled trades. The GPS had saved it as a frequent route. He frowned slightly, curiosity sparking. Why would a man like Brian Lewis, dressed in wealth, dripping arrogance, have that address saved in his car? He glanced at the screen again. There were multiple logs, weeks apart. The car had been there several times. The system even showed timestamps, Saturday afternoons, mid-month, every time. Derrick said nothing. He simply tapped the display off and continued working. When he finished, he handed Brian the keys. "You're good to go now. Sensors replaced, GPS recalibrated. Be careful with it for the next few days." Brian grabbed the keys without looking up. Finally. Maybe next time I'll go somewhere with real professionals. He turned to leave, but paused when Derrick said, "One more thing, sir. You've got some old routes stored in the system. Might want to clear those if you don't use them anymore." Brian's head snapped around, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "What routes?" Derrick's voice stayed calm. "Just one that points to the Coleman Community Center." For a moment, Brian froze, his confident smirk faltering ever so slightly. Then he laughed it off. "Must be the previous owner." "Not my problem." He walked out, but Derrick noticed the way his shoulders stiffened, how his stride lost its rhythm. The garage door rattled shut behind the Mercedes. The noise echoed off the walls, leaving behind a silence thick with questions. The younger mechanic, Luis, looked at Derrick. "Boss, you good?" Derrick nodded slowly, eyes still on the street outside. "Yeah," he murmured. "Just thinking." Because something didn't add up. That man's arrogance wasn't just ego, it was armor, and somewhere beneath it was a truth Derrick hadn't seen yet. The GPS had spoken a name that connected them both. And Derrick knew one thing for sure. He'd be seeing Brian Lewis again. 2 days later, the silver Mercedes rolled back into the lot. The sound of its engine was smooth, but the man behind the wheel wasn't. Brian Lewis stepped out, sunglasses gleaming, suit pressed sharp enough to cut. The slam of the car door turned every head in the shop. "Where's the so-called mechanic?" he barked. "I need to talk to him now." Derrick was under a pickup truck at the back bay. He slid out, wiping his hands on a rag, and met the man's glare with his usual calm. "Morning, Mr. Lewis." Something wrong with the Mercedes? Brian tossed his keys onto the counter. "You tell me." "The GPS keeps saying it can't find the route home. Every time I start the engine, it flashes some stupid message about a community center. You people messed up the system when you touched it." The words hung heavy. You people. Ruthless, thoughtless, loaded with the kind of disrespect that didn't even know it was cruelty. Derrick didn't react. He simply nodded. "Let's take a look." He climbed into the driver's seat, the leather creaking beneath him. The digital screen flickered to life. "Welcome back, Brian. Would you like to continue navigation to the Coleman Community Center?" The message glowed bright and clear. Brian's jaw tightened. "See? That. I didn't set that. You broke something." Derrick tilted his head, scanning the logs. "Actually, the route's been saved for several months. These timestamps go back before your last service." "Then delete it," Brian snapped. I don't want anything with that name showing up again. Derrick's fingers paused on the screen. He could delete it easily, but curiosity whispered otherwise. He wanted to know why this man was so desperate to erase it. He looked up slowly. Mr. Lewis, you've been there before, haven't you? Brian flinched, so subtly that most people wouldn't have noticed. His lips pressed into a thin line. No, I told you, I don't know anything about that place. Just fix it. Derrick gave a small nod and worked quietly, pretending to recalibrate the GPS system. But his mind wasn't quiet at all. Why did a man like Brian Lewis, who wore arrogance like armor, care so much about a community center he supposedly didn't know? Why erase it so completely? Minutes later, the GPS beeped softly. Derrick glanced at the saved routes again. There were more entries than before. He tapped a hidden submenu, something most owners never used, and found voice command logs. He pressed one by accident, and a familiar voice echoed from the speakers. Navigate to Coleman Community Center, please hurry. It wasn't Brian's voice. It was a woman's. Young, nervous. Derrick froze. He replayed another file. Calling Derrick Coleman. Tell him thank you for everything he did. Brian lunged forward, snatching the keys. That's enough, he shouted, yanking them from Derrick's hand. His voice shook, not with anger, but panic. Derrick stared at him quietly. Who was that, Mr. Lewis? None of your business, Brian snapped. You people don't know when to stop poking around. Then he caught himself, realizing how it sounded. He looked away. Just reset it. Erase everything. I'll pay double. Derrick didn't move. No need for double, sir. You already paid for the job. Their eyes locked, one filled with pride, the other with patience. For a long second, neither man spoke. Then Brian turned on his heel, muttering, Forget it. I'll have the dealership handle it. He stormed toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, Derrick said quietly, She sounded scared in that recording. Whoever she was, she trusted me. Why would she be in your car? Brian froze mid-step. He didn't turn around. He just said, through clenched teeth, You think you're clever, don't you? Stay out of other people's business. Then he left. The Mercedes roared out of the lot, tires screeching against asphalt. The echo lingered long after the car was gone. Luis, the young mechanic, peeked from behind a toolbox. Boss, what was that about? Derrick didn't answer. He walked back to the counter, picked up the rag again, and wiped grease from his hands that was no longer there. He could have let it go. But that voice, her voice, wouldn't leave his mind. Who was she? Why did she know his name? And why was a man like Brian Lewis so desperate to erase her? That evening, after closing up shop, Derrick sat in his office staring at the stack of invoices on his desk. The shop lights buzzed faintly overhead. He wasn't the type to pry into people's lives. But something about this felt different. The woman's tone wasn't random. It was personal. Urgent. He pulled out his phone, searched the logs from the car's service history he'd saved earlier. Each visit, each timestamp. One date stood out. 3 months ago. The same week his community center had received an anonymous donation, enough to fund their new computer lab. He leaned back slowly, realization creeping over him like dawn. Whoever the woman was, she'd known him. And the man who mocked him for being uneducated was somehow tied to the very program that taught education through skill and kindness. The truth was circling, and Derrick knew the next time Brian Lewis returned, he'd have to face it. That night, Derrick couldn't shake the sound of the woman's voice. Her words replayed over and over. Tell him thank you for everything he did." It wasn't a coincidence. It felt like a message that had found its way back home. He sat alone in his small office, the hum of the vending machine filling the silence. The shop was dark, except for the glow from his computer screen. He opened the database where he logged every car that came through the shop. The Mercedes was there, along with the VIN number and timestamps. He clicked through the maintenance records, then cross-checked the dates with files from the Coleman Community Center, the youth program he'd founded 5 years earlier. There it was, a familiar date, 3 months ago. The same day the Mercedes had been serviced somewhere else in town, and the same day the center had received a $25,000 anonymous donation. Derrick frowned. He remembered that day clearly. The check had come with no name, just a note. For the kids who fix what others overlook. He hadn't thought much of it then. But now, he wondered. He opened the community center's registration list and scrolled down through the names of former students, kids who had gone through his program and found jobs in local garages, dealerships, even tech companies. Then one name stopped him cold. Melissa Lewis, Brian's last name. He clicked her file. She had joined the program 2 years earlier, a scholarship student who dropped out of an expensive college after her father cut her off. She'd been bright, curious, full of questions about engines and coding diagnostics, and she'd written a note in her file before she graduated. "Mr. Coleman, thank you for teaching me what real education looks like." Derrick leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. So the woman's voice on the GPS, the one thanking him, it wasn't random. It was her, Melissa Lewis, the daughter of the man who'd called him uneducated. He rubbed a hand over his face, a mix of disbelief and quiet understanding settling in. The GPS logs weren't an accident. Melissa had used her father's car at some point, probably when she was still living with him. And somehow, even after she left, her voice remained in the car's memory, a trace of truth her father couldn't erase, no matter how hard he tried. The next morning, Derrick arrived early. He stood at the shop's entrance, watching the sunrise reflect off the city skyline. For years, people like Brian had looked down on him, the mechanic with dirty hands. But his hands had built something worth more than any degree could buy, a legacy that gave others a second chance. He smiled to himself. He finally understood why the universe had crossed their paths again. Brian's arrogance wasn't just ignorance, it was fear. Fear that the very man he'd mocked had given his daughter what he never could. Purpose. And Derrick knew what he had to do next. He wasn't going to humiliate Brian. He was going to show him. Not through anger, through truth, because sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from shouting. They come from reflection. And this time, Brian Lewis was about to see his reflection in the one place he'd never expected, his own car. If you're still watching, you can feel that moment when pride starts to crumble. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever seen arrogance meet its match. Because what happens next will prove that knowledge without humility isn't wisdom at all. The following Friday morning, the shop was busier than usual. Engines humming, wrenches clinking, phones ringing. Derrick moved calmly among the chaos, checking work orders and greeting customers with his usual quiet authority. But when he saw the silver Mercedes glide into the parking lot again, he felt the air in the room change. Brian Lewis stepped out, his face set like stone. His jaw was tight, his expression colder than the polished steel of his car. He didn't look left or right, just marched straight toward Derrick. "You touched my system again, didn't you?" he snapped, tossing his keys onto the counter. "The dealership said someone messed with my settings." Derrick wiped his hands, voice steady. No one's touched it since you left, sir. But if there's an issue, I'll take a look. Brian's tone sharpened. I told you I didn't want that name showing up again. Now every time I start the car, the GPS greets me with that same stupid message. Derrick tilted his head slightly. Which message? You know which one, Brian growled. That thank you nonsense. The whole shop went quiet. The young mechanics stopped what they were doing. Even the radio's music seemed to fade out. Derrick's gaze stayed calm. Sir, maybe we should talk privately. Brian smirked. What, you embarrassed now? You should be. You can't even fix a simple car without leaving your name stamped all over it. He said it loud. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Loud enough to humiliate. But Derrick didn't flinch. He gestured toward the Mercedes. Let's go for a drive, Mr. Lewis. I think it's time we clear up the misunderstanding. The two men got into the car. The engine purred to life, smooth as silk. Derrick tapped the dashboard screen. You mentioned the GPS gives you a strange message. Mind if I show you something? Brian folded his arms. Be my guest. Derrick selected the voice command history. The system displayed a list of saved commands. He tapped the most recent one, and the car's speaker came alive. Navigate to Coleman Community Center, the voice said softly. Tell him thank you for everything he did. Brian stiffened, his hands clenched on his knees. Derrick looked at him quietly. Recognize that voice, Mr. Lewis? Brian said nothing. Derrick pressed another log. Calling Derrick Coleman. Please answer. Dad's not listening to me again. The silence that followed was heavier than steel. Brian's face drained of color. He stared straight ahead, jaw trembling. Derrick spoke softly, respectfully. That's your daughter, isn't it? Melissa. Brian's throat tightened. He didn't answer. Derrick continued. She came through my program 2 years ago. Bright girl, sharp mind. She learned how to rebuild an engine before most kids learn to drive one. Brian finally turned, his eyes wet with something between guilt and anger. You stay out of my family's business. I didn't go looking for it, Derrick said gently. It found me. Your daughter's been trying to thank me for years, and I think she's been trying to reach you too. Brian looked down, his voice barely a whisper. I sent her to college so she could have a better life. She dropped out to work with tools and grease. I thought she threw it all away. Derrick leaned back. She didn't throw anything away. She found what you couldn't see, a kind of education that doesn't come from titles or offices. For a long moment, Brian sat frozen, his reflection flickering in the glossy dashboard. The message still glowed faintly across the screen. Thank you for everything you did. Finally, Derrick spoke again. Calm, steady. You called me uneducated. But education isn't just degrees and diplomas. It's what you pass on to others. Your daughter learned that here. Brian exhaled shakily, eyes glistening. I didn't know, he said quietly. I didn't know she cared about this place. She didn't just care, Derrick replied. She changed it. That anonymous donation that built our computer lab, that was her. I found the note. She did it in your name. Brian's lips parted. In my name? Derrick nodded. Maybe she was trying to remind you that respect can be earned in more than one way. The car sat still for a long time, both men silent. Then Brian took off his sunglasses. His voice cracked as he spoke. You didn't deserve how I talked to you. I was wrong. Derrick gave a small nod. It's all right, sir. We all learn something new every day. Brian turned toward him, his tone softer. You know, she invited me to that graduation ceremony at your center once. I told her I was too busy. He swallowed hard. Maybe it's not too late to fix that. Derrick smiled faintly. It's never too late, Mr. Lewis. They sat quietly for another minute before Brian started the car. The GPS voice chimed one last time, cheerful and clear. Welcome back, Brian. Would you like to continue navigation to the Coleman Community Center? Brian let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, he whispered. Yeah, let's go there. A week later, the Coleman Community Center buzzed with life. Children laughed in the courtyard, young trainees hunched over engine parts, and the air smelled faintly of oil and promise. Derrick Coleman stood near the open garage bay, clipboard in hand, watching one of the students successfully ignite an old motorcycle engine. The roar filled the yard, followed by a chorus of cheers. That's when a black Mercedes pulled up by the gate. It slowed to a stop, sunlight glinting off its hood. Derrick recognized it immediately. Brian Lewis stepped out. No suit this time, no sunglasses, no polished arrogance. Just a man wearing humility and something close to regret. He looked around at the students, their hands stained with grease, their eyes bright with ambition. Then he spotted Derrick and walked toward him. For a moment, neither spoke. The same silence that once carried tension now felt like understanding. Brian cleared his throat. Melissa told me about this place, he said quietly. I finally listened. Derrick gave a slow nod. She's a good kid. Smart, one of the best we've ever had. Brian's voice cracked. I didn't see it before. I thought she was throwing away her education. Turns out she was getting one that actually meant something. He looked around again, taking it all in, the laughter, the teamwork, the pride in each student's eyes. You built this, he said softly. Without the kind of education I used to think was the only one that mattered. Derrick smiled faintly. Books teach you how things work. Life teaches you why they matter. Brian let out a shaky breath. I deserved every second of that embarrassment, but you never humiliated me. You just showed me the truth. It wasn't about proving anything, Derrick replied. Sometimes people need to see who they're speaking to, not what they're speaking at. A few minutes later, Melissa arrived. She froze when she saw her father standing there. Dad, she whispered, shocked. Brian turned, eyes soft. I came to see what you built, honey. She smiled through tears and ran into his arms. For the first time in years, he held his daughter without judgment, just pride. Derrick turned away, giving them space. The sun spilled over the courtyard, golden and warm, lighting the words painted above the garage door. Knowledge is power, but character builds the engine. As the Mercedes drove away later that afternoon, the GPS voice chirped its usual greeting. Welcome back, Brian. Would you like to continue navigation to the Coleman Community Center? This time, Brian smiled. Yes, he whispered. Always. If stories like this remind you that true intelligence has nothing to do with status, hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next story, where quiet wisdom humbles pride and respect finally finds its voice.